So today's class is all about Chapter 10, and we'll be covering principles of security models, design, and capabilities. Okay, so specifically what we'll be talking about site and facility design. And you may be thinking, well, this is a pretty boring topic, not heavily related to information security. However, keep in mind the three major goals of information security. What are they? Confidentiality, integrity, and what's the A? Availability. So if you think back to the layers of information security, they took the markers away. Oh, no, they didn't. Okay. The outermost layer is the perimeter. Okay. So we want to protect everything within the perimeter because we could have perfect network security, perfect server security, perfect endpoint security. But if you can just walk right in and steal the equipment, at minimum, we don't have availability because the equipment's not there. Okay, so if I have a server, draw this little server on the board. Say I have a server, okay? So that server right there, if it's running on the local network, presumably we can access what's on it, right? Let's say this burglar, okay? You guys understand the bag? That means he's a burglar, right? If he steals the server, we can't access what's on it. Does that make sense? So that's how this relates to design. All right, also talking about physical security controls, as well as physical security itself. So let's go through some goals. Okay, I think the goals, understanding why we're caring about physical security or physical anything really, because this isn't just about security. All right, we want to protect our people. Who are our people? Employees, certainly. Customers, yeah. Any sort of stakeholders of the company, be they owners, be they anyone. So we want to protect people. We want to protect our places. What sort of places are we talking about? Okay, so certainly the workplace, so any sort of physical premises we may have, be it land, be it buildings, be it vehicles, any property, plant, and equipment. It's vital that we keep those protected, okay? Because what happens if we don't is, well, we don't have them anymore. We lost them. Now, in some cases, could insurance mitigate some of that risk? Sure, but let's be honest, okay? Is insurance known for wanting to pay out? No. Okay, they're known for finding something. Maybe you didn't have the right flood policy. Maybe you didn't have rioting policies. You know, there's thousands of different policies they may try to say, well, you didn't have this specific one, okay? Think about microburst versus tornado. You know what the difference is? Okay, probably not something you have to worry about too much in Colorado, but down south, the idea is that if it's not recognized by, it's either NOAA or National Weather Service. I always get those two confused. Whichever one of those doesn't recognize it, can't be considered a tornado. So a lot of times insurance will try to weasel their way out of it and say, we had tornado coverage, you didn't have microburst coverage. So, you know, in general, microburst is something like 150 mile per hour winds, minimum. All right, so we want to protect our places. We want to protect our things. All right, what's inside the places. You know, why do we care about things? Are we materialistic? Somewhat. Yeah, so if we lose our things, we may lose important data. Let's say that I had a server, didn't bother to encrypt any of the storage on it. All right, so when I'm not encrypting the storage, let's say this burglar walks away with it. Can that destroy people's lives? Fairly easily, okay? So, you know, you can probably imagine some types of businesses that you could destroy people's lives. You can destroy people's credit scores. They can't buy a house. They get depressed, you know. Let's talk about something happier. Data. All right, we talked about data, actually. So the network itself. You know, we want to have uptime. We want to have a secure network. I think we've talked about that enough in the previous semester. All right, and lastly, profitability. All right, if you're a profit-seeking company, profitability is vital. Okay, why? So you do have fiduciary responsibility to stakeholders, like Ron said. Why else? Okay, keeps the business going. Let's think about more societal level. All right, if your company's not profitable, people lose their jobs. That's a bad thing. If your company's not profitable, society doesn't get any advantages from your business. That's a bad thing. If you're not profitable, society doesn't receive any innovation from your business. These are all bad things. All right? Profitability, in my opinion and many others, improves the standard of living for everyone. All right, if you have profitable companies, they can hire people, the economy works. If you don't have a profitable company, you know, you have situations where you have lots of industry leaving. All right? And think about economics. All right, when you have industry leaving, let's say, pick any city you want. Let's say they have a big automotive industry. And let's say that that industry leaves. What happens to the city? Well, so they're not producing cars, but it doesn't just affect people who are working in automotive. All right? So in general, let's say that the automotive industry was worth $100 million. The idea with economics, at least a lot of economic theory, is that that would be an overall economic impact between 500 million and 1 billion for the city. Does that make sense? So profitability is vital. All right, you can disagree with that, I guess, but. So, secure design principles. All right. One of the things the book recommends you start with is secure facility plan. And what the secure facility plan is, it's a formal document. It's going to outline what the organization needs and how they're going to get there and what actions they take. So, for instance, let's say that we are a small, we're a small retail store, 25 employees. All right. Our secure facility plan is going to look a lot different than, say, a corporation with 100,000 employees at a headquarters, right? The needs are different. You have 25 people and a small retail store. You know, you could argue that if it's a small enough town, you could probably make an argument there's going to be pent-up demand. Are you guys familiar with pent-up demand? You guys take supply chain class? Interesting. All right. So pent-up demand is whenever you have demand that will be held whenever it can't be met. So in other words, what that means is, let's say that Ben wants to buy, what type of technology you want to buy? A graphics card? Okay, Ben wants to buy a 3090. Okay, there's not a supply of a 3090 right now. Okay, he still wants that 3090. It's not an impulse buy. All right, so what happens is he still wants a 3090 a year from now. That's pent-up demand. In contrast, let's say that Ben, what's your favorite food? Okay, let's say that Ben's craving some Mexican food, and he tries to go down to Tequila's, and it's closed. He says, well, that's a bummer. But he goes down to, let's just say Zia's. Is that how you say it? Say he goes down to Zia's, and he gets himself some Mexican food. There's no pent-up demand there because he was able to fulfill what he wanted. Another time where there wouldn't be pent-up demand, let's say that Ben wanted Mexican food, and he saw there was a pizza place across the street. Okay? Pizza could be a substitute product to Mexican food. They're both food, right? So that's what pent-up demand is. Now, the reason I brought that up, if you're in a small town and you are the only shop of a particular type, it is very possible that there may be pent-up demand. If that's the case, you may not be quite as concerned with having minimal downtime of your operations. Because people can't get it today, they'll just come back tomorrow. Not to say that's a way to think, but that is probably something that's going to make sense. All right. So consider pent-up demand. Okay, and by the way, that's spelled P-E-N-T. So part of this is to do a critical path analysis. So as the name would imply, critical path analysis, what you're looking at is basically, what do we need to do transactions? Okay, so a customer walks in the store. First of all, we have to have a working building, correct? That's part of it. So we have a building. Let's just say this is our store. Critical path analysis. What does a customer need to be able to walk in, pay for the goods, and walk back out? All right? And it doesn't have to be a physical store. Say we're an online retailer. What do our customers need to be able to do to have a transaction take place? We need to have a working website. All right, you need to have a working inventory system. You need to have working databases. All right, you need to have a working network. It's the basic stuff. That's all we're doing with critical path analysis. All right, so you also want to consider the design of IT systems, and specifically the design of IT systems from a more physical perspective. So if you have a server room, okay, what is a server room going to have inside of it? Servers. Not a trick question. What else is it going to have inside of it? Networking equipment, right? Some cabling, certainly switches, probably some routers. Basic stuff. What does that stuff need to run? Electricity is the most basic one, but think about our lab here. I think I've mentioned it, that we have a server rack in there, but I can't really turn them on. Why not? You need cooling, all right? Servers put out a lot of heat. So you think about any electronic device other than a heater, are any of them actually 100% efficient? Okay. Will they ever be 100% efficient? Most likely not. But why is a heater 100% efficient? Electric heater specifically. So resistive heater, every single unit of electricity you put into it, it puts it out as what? Heat. Okay? So therefore, electric heaters, 100% efficient. Nothing else is, though. Well, I wouldn't say nothing. Very few other things are. So you have to consider HVAC. Now, is HVAC just air conditioning? No, what else is it? In the context of a data center specifically. All right? Humidity, right? We don't want to be really anywhere close to 95%, but if we're at 95% humidity in a server room, we have big problems. All right, because that humidity could condense inside a server. What happens if humidity condenses inside of servers? Could it break the server? Sure. Will it? Maybe, maybe not. But why risk it? All right. You also don't want to have ridiculously low humidity. Why not? Static, exactly right. Okay. So the other component of HVAC to be aware of course, is filtration. All right. So in a server room, you don't want to have dust. At least you don't want to have very much dust. Obviously, you can't prevent 100% of it, even in a clean room. But you want to mitigate that. So things like HEPA filters, all right? That's probably going to be built into the type of HVAC systems you're going to find inside of server rooms. And that's for good reason. It's an effective way to mitigate dust, all right? Also, water. I don't have water in that they need water, but if you're going to have a data center, presumably people are working there. Number one, they need to drink. That's one of the reasons this is up here. Number two, you want to make sure that you're not having your servers directly below like a sprinkler head that could go off. All right, does that make sense? So think about where the pipes are in a building. They shouldn't be anywhere near a server room. In fact, I would probably make an argument that in some cases, you should consider having drains inside the server room. Oh, what's the downside of that? Potential downside. Drains can flood, exactly. So if they back up, that could be a problem. You can mitigate that with stuff like sump pumps and other types of pumps, I'm sure. So that's something to think about. Another thing to consider. What floor do you have your data center on? There's advantages of having it in a basement, are there not? But there's also disadvantages. Think about a lot of the buildings in New Orleans, 2005, Katrina. All right, what happened? I mean, it flooded its second floors in a lot of cases, but it certainly would have flooded a basement. All right. So what about having it on the top floor? Is that good? There's advantages and disadvantages to both. All right, in general, I think you're probably going to end up having a raised floor inside of most modern server rooms. So personally, I'm of the opinion that it makes sense to have a raised floor, probably about 2 or 3 feet. And that way, if there is water, it's just on cables. Water and cables don't really cause a problem unless there's a exposed, copper wire or something passing a bunch of electricity, which shouldn't happen anyway. Does that make sense? So my opinion is, plop it in the basement, but plop it on a raised floor. All right. And if I'm not mistaken, when you guys went on the tour with, who was it last semester? Who took you guys on a tour? Brian. Don't they use raised server room floors? I'm pretty sure they do in Burnt. I don't think they do in the library, but I might be wrong about that. But raised floors are a good thing. All right, site selection. So I would make an argument the most important thing about site selection is not finding a single perfect site. Okay? You may say, well, I think that, Durango, Colorado is the perfect site because it doesn't get tornadoes, hurricanes. What else does it not get? Earthquakes, I guess. Yeah, so there's some downsides though. Snow, ice, avalanches, blizzards. What else? What about river flooding? Does that happen? I'm sure it'll happen at some point. So you don't want to have a single perfect site because there is no perfect site. All right? Let's say you could find a perfect site. Where would that be? A site with no natural disaster possibility. It's not going to be on Earth, let's just be honest. I don't know what Mars has in terms of natural disasters. Anyone know what Mars would have in terms of natural disasters? It'd be really cold, wouldn't it? I don't know. I'm not a Mars expert. Instead, I suggest having multiple sites. Now, this can be multiple company-owned sites, or this can be cloud sites. So with a cloud site, presumably you're going to go with a cloud vendor that has multiple data centers. Your data is going to be distributed not just at a single data center, but at multiple data centers. Obviously, that's going to cost you a little bit more money, but that's probably something that's worth it. So the obvious thing is to consider the cost, location, and size of any structure you may want to get. All right, so think about how many employees are going to be there. All right, if you're going to have, let's say, 10,000 employees, okay, what size building are you going to need? You're going to need like a standard strip mall location? Why not? You can't fit 10,000 people in a strip mall. Not even the whole strip mall, but much less one part of the strip mall. All right? Consider utilities. There's a lot of places out there that land is very inexpensive. The downside is you don't get any utilities. You don't get power. You don't get water service. You don't get sewer. That's not to say that you can't get around that. Okay? So you don't have power. Is it theoretically possible to use other sources to generate your own power? Theoretically. All right. How well that works? Well, I'm not here to say. Water. Is it possible to dig a well? In a lot of areas, yes. Sewer. Can you put in a commercial septic system? It's possible. So think about that. Infrastructure. It's becoming less of a big deal with stuff like work from home, stuff like satellite internet service. Not talking about HughesNet, talking about stuff like Starlink, of course. Becoming less of a concern. You know, you may not have to have 10,000 people commute to your office every day. You may be able to have only a couple hundred. I don't know. But certainly you want to consider what your company needs. And also think about safety. So environmental safety. Let's say you're wanting to buy some land. All right. Would you want to buy land that's, let's just say, a hazardous waste site? Is that a good place to put a company? Why not? Yeah. It can cause lots of problems. All right. Crime. All right, let's just be blunt. Do you want to have a company that's in an area with a lot of crime? Why not? So theft. So you're going to be having a very high shrinkage expense, in other words. Okay. That's certainly one reason. Why else? If something happens, which hopefully it wouldn't, but if something were to happen at the office to, you know, people within your organization, does that open you up to lawsuits? Absolutely. So consider safety as well. All right, facility design. I'm not going to stand here and tell you if you should follow every single government regulation ever. For one thing, that's impossible. You know, you could probably add on many other reasons why that may not be a good idea. I'll leave that up to your opinion. But some things to think in mind are like worker safety with OSHA. All right, consider those regulations. I'm not saying follow them. I'm saying consider them. All right, Environmental Protection Agency. It's probably not good to pollute. Okay. ADA, American Disability Act. All right, probably want to comply with that. Okay, there's a lot of legal action that's taken against companies that don't. Read a news story a couple years ago. There was this person who had sued, you know, I think thousands of companies. You know what they sued them for? They got out measuring tape and they measured from the ground to the handicap parking sign. And apparently ADA specifies the exact number of inches it should be. And they sued companies that didn't have it that exact number of inches. Have your own opinion about that sort of stuff, but just understand that if you don't follow them, you open your company up to a lot of liability. All right. Building codes. You know, if you're building a building, you might want to consider building codes. All right, I'm not saying you should follow every single one of them, but you should probably consider them. All right. A lot of the building codes make sense. Many of them don't make sense. So I'll leave it up to you what you choose to follow. All right. Consider obfuscation. That's something the book really talked a lot about. I don't think it's particularly effective, personally. So the idea that the book sort of mentioned is, let's say you have a data center. Instead of advertising it's a data center, you pretend it's something else that's really boring, like a chicken manufacturing plant or something. Not something I would necessarily recommend, but I think in some circumstances it may make sense. A lot of times what you see instead, though, are you see where they have like a warehouse that they pretend is a house. That's kind of common. But obviously that warehouse wouldn't have a lot of foot traffic or anything. And it's also somewhat common for data centers to appear as a nondescript building. To meet the organization's needs. You know, if the organization needs to have a very large building, meet that. If the organization needs a small building, meet that. If they need a very secure building, meet that. You know, if they're in an area with low crime and low natural disasters, you know, The key here is not to overspend. What happens if you overspend on a building? All right, do you ever get that money back? Unlikely. Let's say that you do manage to get the money back. Okay, do you get it back and keep the building? Very few circumstances in which you would do that. There are certainly going to be some exceptions, but for the most part, you have to sell to recoup the money from real estate. Talk about outage prevention. All right. So the key with outage prevention is to have everything be redundant. All right. Backup power. I would suggest having at least 2 power sources. So maybe you have a diesel generator out back that kicks on, and you have your standard power service. All right. But you could also add on a third, maybe even a fourth if you wanted. So if you're so inclined, you could plop a solar panels on the roof or something. You could plop a windmill out back. What are some other power sources we may use? I probably can't get a nuclear reactor and put it out back. That probably wouldn't go over too well. I think those are the main ones. I mean, you could probably argue for battery backup stuff. I don't think the technology's there yet to be able to support a company. Personal opinion. Let me rephrase that. I don't think that's feasible to do. It's possible to do, but with lithium-ion batteries, you're facing a lot of degradation. They're high cost. If they catch on fire, you can't put it out. There's a lot of downsides, not very many upsides to using a battery backup for a whole building. Does that make sense? Not to mention, what do we know about lithium-ion batteries? Okay, they're lightweight or they're heavy? Extremely heavy. All right. So if you put those on anything other than a ground floor with like a slab foundation, what's likely to happen? Break the floor, exactly. So batteries, in my opinion, would not make a good outage prevention. Not to say you shouldn't consider, UPSs for server racks and that sort of stuff, but I would recommend against them for an entire building. All right, redundancy. Make sure that everything's going to automatically fail over. If you have multiple UPSs, the idea is, I'm going to draw the back of a server rack here. Okay, so in general, this is a server, okay? We got 2 power supplies on it. All right, we have a UPS down here, and we have a UPS down here. All right, so if this UPS, let's say it's connected to the main, and let's say this one down here is connected to the diesel. Okay, so you want to have the one from the main powering one power supply, one from the diesel powering the other power supply. All right, now that's certainly one approach. I've seen it done on many other ways as well, but the idea is that if one power source goes out, it just switches over to the other. So most servers are going to have redundant hot swappable power supplies, right? Most good servers, all right. Anything you're buying for a company, it should not have a single power supply in it. All right. This includes everything, though. So not just multiple power sources, multiple ISPs. All right, so we have a border router. All right, we have 2 border routers, actually. All right, so one of them is going to go to one network interface card, the other goes to the other network interface card. Servers oftentimes will have more than 4 network interface cards. It's not uncommon to see 8 to 16, but certainly I would say that 2 or 3 is going to be the minimum you're likely to see on server equipment. So think about that. You have one ISP, maybe it's a fiber connection. You have another ISP coming in over, I don't know, some other type of connection. And the idea is you have everything be redundant. All right. So I talked about the network a little bit. Now, obviously, you're not going to have anything. This is a simplification because you're going to have switches obviously going to the routers. Okay. You're not going to have anything from the border router going straight to a server. That just wouldn't make any sense. All right. But just have redundancy built into the design. All right. Let's talk about facility security controls. So the idea behind these is we have 6 D's. Okay, so the first one is deter. If you deter something, you prevent it from happening altogether. So let's say that I put a camera up. That's a deterrence. Okay, it doesn't physically stop anything from happening, but if you know that you're being recorded, well, let's say if someone knows they're being recorded, they're less likely to commit a crime if they're thinking rationally. All right. Let's say someone's completely irrational. Maybe they're using drugs or something. All right. Then your deterrents don't really have much effect at all because they're not thinking rationally. So you deny. You deny with physical prevention. You put a fence and a gate up. You deny entry. Okay, it's a physical thing that's there to stop someone from entering. You lock your door. All right. That's denying someone entry. You detect. So again, a camera can also be used to detect, but in this context, we're more likely talking about having like burglar systems we're going to cover in a little bit, and that sort of thing. All right, you delay. So let's face it, if someone is motivated enough to get into a building, given unlimited time, they're going to be able to get into the building most of the time. All right, you could have a complete idiot, and then I guess they couldn't get into a building. But assuming someone's physically able and smart enough to do so, I mean, let's face it, eventually, could you just cut through the roof? You get a chainsaw on the roof, even metal roof, you can cut through that, right? Then you're in the building. It's not the easiest way to get in, I reckon, but it's possible. So the idea is you delay entry. All right. Determine. Okay, so you determine how they entered, and you prevent it, I guess. And then finally, you decide what to do. So hopefully it's not a situation any of us ever face. But if someone breaks in, you decide what to do. All right, do you hide? Do you fight them? Other things I don't want to say on YouTube, I'll leave those up to you. But that's the idea we're talking about here. All right, does that make sense? Any questions so far? All right, so some general tips, just some kind of things in general we want to consider. Wiring closets. So wiring closets in this context are likely referring to some sort of data center that's used for distributing network to a building. Likely we're not discussing wiring closets in the context of electrical wiring, although we could. So regardless of the type of wiring closet we're discussing, we want to make sure that we have strong access control on it. All right, because let's say that we have a spot in our building that is used to give power to everyone in the building. Do you want anyone to be able to walk in it? Why not? They could kill the power, that's one thing. The other thing they could kill is themselves. Let's be honest, okay? High voltage is not very safe, is it? All right. Data centers, same thing. You want to make sure that you're protecting the physical access to the room. We've also talked about protecting the HVAC and all that other equipment. This is all vital. All right. If any of these layers are not strong, we can have breaches. Even if they're all strong, we can still technically have breaches, just a lot less likely. And if we could prove that all of our layers were strong and to a reasonable industry standard, we could probably win lawsuits if someone sued us, right? So that's an important thing. All right, so think about smart cards and badges. I think they have a lot of advantages. They have some disadvantages as well. All right, so even in bulk, you're looking at spending a minimum of $100 a door. That's a minimum. All right, to go and get a door that's equipped like we have here with card read technology. And that's pretty expensive. Some other disadvantages. So a lot of them are going to be battery operated. Some of them are going to be hardwired. Either way, you can imagine scenarios in which those would have outages. All right. So if you have batteries that are dead, how do you get into the door? That could be a disadvantage. Now, a lot of them have we can stick a 9-volt under it, and you can, use it that way. But who carries around a 9-volt with them? Who's got a 9-volt with them? Anyone? Yeah, I didn't think so. Some other disadvantages. Just like with a key. It's like I got a key ring here. If I drop it on the ground and leave it there, can someone get into all the stuff I can get into? Yeah. All right. What if I drop my ID card on the floor? All right, they can get into all the same stuff. So they both have those disadvantages. And what I personally suggest, and a lot of the enterprise lock systems can do this, is 2 or more factor authentication. Okay, so you have your physical badge, or ID card, whatever it's called, and you use it for the first part, and then you enter a code. All right, and that's certainly one way. Another way, you use your badge, maybe you enter a code, maybe you also scan your fingerprint. Having multiple factors of authentication for a door is beneficial, just like it is for accounts. All right, you also got proximity devices. Personally, I think these are not something you'd want to use for high security, because what they're saying is, we detect you're close by, therefore we're going to unlock the door. Well, that has some obvious downsides. What's one downside to that? Yeah. So proximity means you're close by, Let's say you're within 10 feet of something, and you're on a phone call. You're not paying any attention. And someone sees you by a door, they go into the door. So I think proximity is probably a bad idea. That's my personal opinion. Feel free to disagree. But that's what we're covering today. All right, so intrusion detection systems. All right, we talked about this from a technological perspective. We talked about that a lot in the networking class. I don't feel the need to cover it in great detail here. So what we are going to talk about, though, is burglar alarms, so physical intrusion detection systems. All right, so a couple different components these often have. Okay, a glass break detector. Obviously, the goal there is to detect the glass was broken, trigger an alarm, and presumably, let's say someone throws a brick through your window. All right, you'd want to be able to know about that because they may do that to break in. And even if they're only doing it to vandalize, well, you still want to know about that, right? All right, door sensor. Obviously, that tells you when a door is open. Then you also got motion detectors. Several different types of them. The most common, definitely infrared. So infrared, of course, is looking for changes in the infrared spectrum. So things like body heat, for instance. Capacitance. So that's looking for changes in, I think, electricity. PEV. That's, of course, looking at a photoresistive, so changes in light. Audio. So it's looking for changes in the audio pattern of a space, and many others. All right. And I would say, in general, it's going to be best practice to have more than one in highly sensitive areas. Because you can beat infrared pretty easily, right? It's not too hard to beat infrared, is it? Let's say you're at a home, and let's say they have infrared sensors. Okay, most likely, they have ones that are considered pet-friendly. Okay, so if you have a pet-friendly sensor, what does that mean you can do to beat it? You just crawl on the floor, right? Try it if you have a motion sensor. You can probably beat it by crawling on the floor. All right, and I'm not telling you how to break in or anything. I'm just saying that's why you have multiple types of sensors. So things like photoresistive, How do you beat light? Well, there's a lot of different ways, but, you could certainly presume an instance in which you darken the windows, and then that triggers it, and then they realize there's nothing happening, and then you do that again, and then you're inside, and that's it. Okay, so none of these are infallible by themselves. Does that make sense? Now, the good news is that, I don't know if that's good news or bad news, but the news is that most people breaking in are pretty stupid, right? So they trigger alarms. All right, you know they were there. All right, they're not very intelligent. So that's a good thing. All right, let's say you got a door sensor. Can you beat it with a magnet? Yeah, easily. If you know where the door sensor is, stick a magnet up to it. It doesn't detect the door open. Most of those are using magnets. Not 100%, but most of them. Try that one too. Might be fun. All right, enough about telling you guys how to break into buildings undetected. So security cameras. All right, they're certainly going to be a good way to tell whether someone broke in. Obviously, you could put them on to some sort of a NVR, network video recorder, and you could certainly use motion detecting with inside the NVR. Certainly one way. All right, so some different types of intrusion alarms. Deterrent, that's going to be highly visible. It's in place to say, we have an alarm, don't break in. Okay, repellent would be something that once they have broken in, it repels them away. Most of the time, that's going to be sirens. Sometimes it could be flashing lights. You could certainly have other less legal repellent methods. Lots of different options there. I'm not going to cover the less legal ones, obviously, but you can figure that out for yourself. Notification. So think about a silent alarm. Okay, it notifies that there was an incident, but it's not there to be flashy. Okay. Then you, of course, have local, where the system is installed locally, and you have central, where it reports back to something central. Pretty straightforward. All right, let's talk about security cameras. Okay, so two major types. You got dome, it's like a dome, and you have bullet, okay, where it looks directly at you. Disadvantages to bullet: you can tell exactly where it's pointing. You can tell exactly where it's seeing. It's a lot more difficult to do that with a dome. All right, but in general, they can both support about the same stuff. Consider having concealed and visible cameras. All right, if you have visible cameras, that's a deterrent. But then people know exactly where not to be. If you have more concealed cameras, they don't know as much where to be. I'm not even going to bother talking about analog security cameras because it's 2022. No one should be using analog security cameras. So I'm just going to assume using IP cameras here. So always have them on a separate VLAN and a separate subnet. All right, that's the bare minimum there. But you definitely don't want your cameras to be addressable on your standard network. This is a personal suggestion. I personally suggest a minimum of 5 megapixels. That's going to be 1440p resolution. In my opinion, everything I've ever seen or read suggests that 1080p is not really great enough to read stuff like license plates, facial details. There's just a huge difference between like a 3 megapixel and a 5 megapixel. Of course, 4K is going to be 8 megapixels. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. Definitely want to use PoE to power them. There's no reason to not use PoE unless they use like a ridiculous number of watts, which is unlikely. I like to talk about you have an NVR, store them on the NVR. Definitely you want to have redundant drives, that sort of thing. All right, electric interruptions. You have faults. Okay, so a fault is where there's an electrical problem of some sort. Okay, a blackout means there's no power at all. Okay, a brownout means there's a disruption in a drop in voltage sort of thing. Okay, a surge, kind of the opposite. You have a peak in voltage, can damage electronics. And of course, a ground is going to be used to provide an alternative path for the current to go. Let's talk about fire suppression. All right. So this is going to be highly dependent upon where you're wanting to be. The answer is not just let's plop a sprinkler system in every building. Okay, could be an answer, could not be. So in general, you have a standard office fire, put it out fairly easily with either water, it's like sprinkler systems like we have in here, nice little concealed units too, or a class ABC fire extinguisher. That'll put out most fires, right? say you got a grease fire. All right, you don't want to use either of those, do you? All right, what's going to happen if you dump water on a grease fire? It's going to cause a lot of problems. Okay, it's certainly going to get a lot larger. Maybe it's going to splash onto you, and you don't want that. All right. So if you've got a kitchen, you're going to use a Class K. K is for kitchen. All right, it's going to be usually they're going to be silver. The fire extinguishers. They don't have to be though. If they want to distinguish it from the Class A, B, Cs. All right, if you got a data center, you don't want any of these. You don't want water. You don't want ABC. You don't want Class K. You want either halon or gas. Okay. So halon is of course a gas, but it's a specific type. Now that said, those are both deadly, right? Because the idea is you deplete the oxygen, and the idea is you don't damage the equipment in there. But generally, you have about 10 to 15 seconds to get out. And if you don't do it within 10 to 15 seconds, you have maybe another 30 seconds, maybe 60 seconds before you die. All right? And that's not a good thing, okay? So if you're ever in a server room and you start to hear alarms and you see flashing lights, get out and figure it out later. Does that make sense? But halon or gas are very beneficial because if they do go off, yeah, I mean, you don't have oxygen in the room, but that doesn't affect the operation of the equipment, does it? All right. Perimeter control, fences and gates. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. You know, if you have a gate, people can't just walk in. If you have a fence, people can't just walk in. Not to say that any of those by themselves are going to be, you know, all you need, but certainly if you're wanting to secure a perimeter, that's a good place to start, right? Okay, so a turnstile. I think these are pretty impractical for most situations. But the idea with a turnstile is you only allow traffic one way, basically. So you see a lot of subways where you can, you know, use it once, it only allows one person through, and you can't go back out the same way. Man traps, also known as airlocks. It's going to be a beneficial thing because, you know, you think about how you would actually approach, you know, if you have multiple locked doors, let's say you follow someone in once, okay? Is that person going to be a little bit suspicious? Maybe not let you follow them again, and they would instead say, hey, why don't you open this door this time? You know, that's what we're talking about with man traps. All right. Lighting. So you want to have your facilities well lit, because facilities well lit, rational individuals, at least, will be less likely to commit crime. Security staff. The book talks about like guards and actual dogs, that sort of thing. You know, consider that. A lot of times, well, I'm not going to say a lot of times, but it's not exactly unheard of to have security staff be some of the criminals, is it? All right. There's been a lot of cases where security guards were the inside man in a heist of some sort. So I'm saying consider it, but I'm also saying, you know, have other methods as well. And lastly, locks. I think locks make a lot of sense. We got a couple minutes. Let's see. We got about 5 minutes left. We'll pass these out, work with your partners on them, and we'll present them next class. How about that? By the way, what do you guys want to do for class on Friday? Or Monday?